morning, Mount Trolley. Good to be with y'all again. It's time for our adult Sunday school class lesson again this week, and I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody's still doing your social distancing, trying to stay apart until we get a vaccine for this pandemic and we get beyond it. And finally, we got some cool weather, so it really feels like fall now. So everything's going well. God's still God. He's still reigning. He's still in control. And all He asks for us to do is just trust and obey. And we know He'll bring us through this. As we start our lesson this morning, we're going to be in the 3rd chapter of Daniel. Very, very familiar story. You've heard of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you've been in church in any amount of time, you've heard this story, a really great story. I don't expect to come here and bring out anything brand new that you've never heard before, but we can look at these 3 Hebrew boys and we can still today be reminded of what we're supposed to be in Christ. We can be reminded how we're supposed to hold to our faith. We can be reminded that we're to serve the only true and living God. We're not to bow to idols, no matter how hard the pressure gets on us. And that's one of the greatest things I want us to look at today is pressure. And I'm not talking about pressure just for adults. I'm talking about a pressure that attacks our children, a pressure that attacks teens, and even college students. And so I'm just hoping with the help of the Holy Spirit and God today that, Lord, I'll be able to help expound on something that we need to be reminded of over and over and over again. Because if you're like me, no matter how long you've been a Christian, no matter how far along you are in your sanctification, there always comes times in our life when, we might just want to side with the crowd instead of standing on what we know is true, just to be accepted. I believe the greatest fear of every person on earth is rejection, not being accepted. So I hope we can just jump in this here today. I hope we can learn a few things, and you bear with me. I'll try to get through this as fast as I can, but there's so much here that you just can't cover the whole 3rd chapter of Daniel in one Sunday school setting. So as we get started, I wanted to give you the lesson objectives. It says to see how trying times call for faith in our trustworthy God, to admire the Hebrews' faith in the face of king's anger, to be willing to stand against the crowd when godly principles are at stake. Our key verses: Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. And just to give you just a little bit of background, kind of take you what Brother Danny was talking about earlier. You got to understand, here comes the Babylonian Empire. They come into Jerusalem, they conquer Jerusalem, they tear down the temple, they tear down the gates, they tear down the walls, and they take a lot of captives. But the captives that they took were actually, I guess you could say, some of the dignitaries, some of these men that they took, or people they took, in their culture, in the Babylonian culture. They look well, they were good-looking people, they were strong people, they were smart people. That was the biggest thing. Especially these 3 Hebrew boys we're going to talk about, they were really smart. And that knowledge came to them not by their own doing, but it really showed the glory of God, how He can take 3 Hebrew boys and give them such knowledge to go into a pagan empire, into this Babylonian empire, and really stand out and make a difference. And one of the things God wants us to do in this world that we're living in, He wants us to stand out and make a difference. Not stand out that we could boast and say, well, look at me and look what I've done. No, but that God could take a weak vessel and show how mighty his strength is through weaker vessels like us. I'm going to start in verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was threescore cubits and the breadth of their 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent and gathered the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together into the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, just to give you a little something about this image. When you think of this image, I'm not saying that it didn't have maybe a figure of a face on it, but don't think of the Statue of Liberty. That's not what it was. Actually, back in the Babylonian Empire, they wanted things to look so glorious and so grand. They really wanted to capture people's attention and really have a way of being able to control the minds of people. So this statue, they said it was about 90 foot tall and about 9 foot wide. But it wasn't like it wasn't in the form of a body. It would be disproportioned. In other words, this is like, it's like it's like the Washington Monument. It was just a tall statue, a tall figure. And most of the time back then, they'd wrap them in gold, but what they'd do is they'd probably build a wood structure, and they would layer it in gold. And it was layered in gold from the top to the bottom. And so you can imagine that when he invited all of these people, these were dignitaries. I'm sure there was some common people there, but we read here who was invited was all the dignitaries, all the ones who had a role in the Babylonian Empire. And you can imagine sitting there at this dedication and looking at this tall golden statue. Now, like I just told you, just the outside was gold, but just this appearance of it with the sun shining down on it and it just hitting that gold foil that it was wrapped in, it just, you looked at it and you said, like, wow, man, that's solid gold, but it wasn't. It's like every other idol. It's like any other statue that we read that these pagans always built. It's hollow. It's shallow. There's nothing on the inside. It's just pretty on the outside. And that's the picture here that Nebuchadnezzar was painting for his constituents or for all the people who run his offices in his provinces. He wanted them to come and look how grand it was. He wanted them to look at what something he had built, something he had made. And it looked glorious on the outside. Man, it's a big old golden statue. But like all idols, it's hollow. There's nothing there. There's nothing on the inside. All it is fake. And we see here where Nebuchadnezzar, he invites everybody to the dedication. Now you got to understand, when you're invited to the dedication, it ain't like you could say, well, I don't feel good today, I can't go. No, if the king invited you to the dedication, you showed up at the dedication. So he had all his dignitaries there. And 3 Hebrew boys were there also. Let's go to verse 4. Then a herald cried out aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at the time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, has set up. And whosoever falleth not down and worship the same hour shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So here you have all these folks. They're gathered together. it ain't until they get to the party that they find out, well, we thought we was just going to a dedication. No. The king wants you to bow down to this idol, to this image. So I want you to think of the amount of pressure that's put on all these dignitaries at this dedication. First, the biggest pressure they would have is whenever they got there, they would see just the appearance of the image. Just the appearance of that image alone would make you feel inferior. Just the image of it, of how tall it was. You would be in awe. You would think, wow, what hands could make this? Another pressure would be the music. I want you to think about this. Music has a very powerful control over people. It does. You look, when David went in and played the harp for Saul to kind of settle Saul down, that was music doing that. You look at the walls of Jericho that fell down. Did you know they were blowing horns when they were walking around that walls of Jericho? Music was a very, very big deal back then. It was used for comforting. It was used to pronounce a king or a dignitary who was coming in. And God even used it with the children of Israel to tear down the walls of Jericho. So music played a very big part. And there was also the pressure of the media. And let me tell you what I mean by that. A herald was cried out. In other words, this was somebody who was sent by the king, who would be in a very open public place, and the first thing he would do was he would cry aloud, "Hear me, hear me." He was bringing a message from the king. This is like, kind of like our modern day media. We put a lot of trust in our media when maybe we shouldn't. Media has a strong power over people. You take it, the media can run a story, and your news channel may be NBC, mine may be ABC, one may be Fox, one may be CNN. And if that's your favorite media channel that you watch, well, if you don't do your homework and go back and do some fact checking, you might believe everything that comes out of their mouth. So media plays a strong part back then as well as it does now. We should always be able to go back and fact check what is actually going on. It says, and there is an image. And it says, whenever you hear the music start to play, it says, whoever does not fall down and worship the same hour shall be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Now you got to hear, we're only through verse 6. We're just getting to the dedication. We're just being sat down at the dedication. Okay? Think of it as a big, if you went to one of these, after a wedding, they always have a big old beautiful dinner for everybody. And everybody's got a round table that they sit at, or a square table. And then all of a sudden the herald comes out, after you're sitting here during this dedication and says, if you don't fall down and worship this image, you're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And they said immediately, the same hour. Well, a big old fiery furnace, if you're going to get one of those started, you don't just say, okay, right here at the dedication, we're going to start the furnace. No, that furnace was probably started a couple days ahead of time to be really good and hot. So as you're walking into the dedication and all, and you're getting ready to, celebrate this image, you can smell that fire burning somewhere. It's that big. It's that hot. If you don't walk by it on the way to the dedication and feel it. So the furnace was started way before the dedication, way before they were invited, sat down for this dedication, for this celebration, that furnace was already being heated up. And it says, therefore, at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people and all the nations and all the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. I want you to notice here, it says that all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshiped the golden image. You know, if you kind of rewind it, or if you go and you start this movie over again and you're looking at it and you're like, well, you know, we're going to get invited to a dedication. It's going to be a nice meal there, I'm sure. We're going to be able to rub elbows with all the dignitaries from all the governors and the provinces here, and, you know, all the sheriffs and all the magistrates. And then there's a decree cried out to bow down. To bow down or either die. Bow down or either perish. I want you to get that in your mind. Because we look at this and we say, well, you know, that's a good story. No, this is a historical event. This really happened. So now you come to a party where you're just as happy as you can be, and all of a sudden the pressure gets turned up on you, and now you're even fearful. What was supposed to be a celebration now has turned into more of a torture gathering. Playing on your mind, well, I got to bow down. I got to bow down or I'll die. Let's go to verses 8 through 12. Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, demesser, all kinds of music, they shall fall down and worship. Now, what I want to show you here is, if you'll remember, I think it's back in chapter 1 or chapter 2. It says here there were certain Chaldeans. These Chaldeans, what they done is they went to the king. They started buttering him up right to start with. O king, live forever. They said, there's 3 Hebrews who you have appointed over certain responsibilities in the kingdom that did not bow. Now, I don't want to go too far in this, but I just want to tell you, here's how it happens. King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. He needs somebody to interpret that dream. Okay? He said, I'm going to kill all my soothsayers, all my astrologers, all my dream interpreters, because they can't interpret this dream for me, but Daniel did. And Daniel had 3 friends. And Daniel pretty much said to the king, look here, I'll come in here and I'll interpret the dream for you. I'll do it. But don't kill none of your people. Don't kill none of your astrologers, your soothsayers, your magicians. Don't kill any of them. I'll interpret it for you. And you always notice, like in life, how it is when you try to help somebody and you do help them, but yet it seems like they always come back and they take advantage of you, kind of stick it to you. That's what these Chaldeans were doing. Because see, they were jealous. I mean, after these Hebrews had done come in and saved most of their lives from the king, they've been promoted. Your Hebrew boys got promoted. Well, somebody got stuck without a job here. Somebody didn't make it up the ladder. Instead, they were up on the ladder and they got demoted because they couldn't interpret these dreams. So all of a sudden, these Hebrew boys, they got promoted. Jealousy set in. Envy set in. And at the very first chance that they could get, after these Hebrews ended up saving their lives from the king, they go in front of the king now and try to put their lives in jeopardy. I know we all know people like that. People that you try to help and, man, they mess up again. You know, people that you try to help and you want to give them a leg up in life. And it always seems like they turn around and they just go against the rule. They go against you. They kick you, you know, for helping them. That's what these Chaldeans were doing to the Hebrew boys. We're not to dwell on stuff like that. In fact, we're supposed to even pray harder for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But just to kind of give you a mindset of these Chaldeans, what they were doing. But these Hebrew boys, they didn't want to, you know, they never tried to go back to them and say, well, look here, we helped y'all. We saved y'all. And look what you're doing to us. No. They act like responsible Christians do. You help people. And you help people. And you help people. And you try to lead them in the right direction. You try to stand out. God never called for us to kick nobody in the teeth while they're down on the ground. That's not what we do. Sometimes it hurts us. Sometimes we have to bear a burden. Sometimes it really stings when somebody does you wrong after you're trying to help them. Well, let me tell you about Jesus. We want to get caught up in all of that. How many times have we let Jesus down? I'm talking to you, Christians. You. How many times has God brought you out of something and done something for you, and we, just like the children of Israel, give us Barabbas, and you just throw Jesus, just throw him away that quick. You're always there to say, God, please help me. I need some help out of this. And he's always faithful to do that for you. And we are always so easy to forget about him. So when somebody here on this side of earth does that to you, just keep in mind, look, I've done that to my Savior many times. I have, Jessie has. I forget where my blessings come from. So always be merciful. Let the Holy Spirit lead you when it's time to leave that situation alone, and not stop, but move on and try to help somebody else. But don't get bitter. Always remember what Jesus done for us. And we should be willing to at least take a couple of extra steps to help somebody else, even though if it costs us something. It's always going to cost us something. But see, these Chaldeans, they went to the king and they said, no, you got some people here just running the show for you in different areas, and they're not bowing down. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They do not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not yet serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? I want you to look right here. This goes to show you how much Nebuchadnezzar really thought about these three Hebrew boys. Nebuchadnezzar said, well, I'm not going to believe a rumor that somebody's brought to me, because I know I got some Chaldeans who are a little bit jealous. They're a little bit envious of these boys. But here's how much Nebuchadnezzar thought of these boys. He said, I'm going to investigate this for myself. He said, you bring them boys to me. let me ask them the question, is it true? So to say that the Hebrew boys didn't have some clout in the Babylonian Empire, I mean, they had really good jobs under the king. But the king thought enough of these guys that I'm not going to believe rumors until I investigate it first. Now, if ye be ready that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, suckbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made well or good. But if not, ye shall be cast in the same hour into the midst of a fiery, burning, fiery furnace. In other words, Nebuchadnezzar says, look here, guys, I'm going to give y'all a second chance. Now, you got to understand, this is the king. When he says something, when he makes a decree, it happens. It's there. But he gives these guys a second chance. He thinks, I almost want to say, you know what, Nebuchadnezzar, that's a good one for you. I'm going to put a check on the good side of your list. Because he gives them a second chance. He does. But then he makes this statement right at the end of verse 15 that shows the arrogance of Nebuchadnezzar. It shows the narcissistic side of Nebuchadnezzar. He says, and who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Now, just when it looks like Nebuchadnezzar is giving these boys a second chance and he's trying to be a good king, then he wants to say, well, what God is there that's going to save you? What God is it that you think can deliver you out of my hands right now at this moment? And as we'll see on down in the book of Daniel a little bit later, God has his way with Nebuchadnezzar. He does. He does. But see, the thing about it is let's take Babylon and let's stick it right here in Horry County today. Babylon had many idols, had many gods. You know, they had a god for just about everything. And here they are, they're building another image. They're building another idol for people to worship. And I see that in our world today. Everybody is willing to jump on the newest, greatest thing. Idol after idol after idol, idol, God after God after God that they put in front of the true and living God. Remember I told you that monument, the image, it was hollow, wrapped in gold. Oh, it looked good, but it was fake. There was nothing in there. Over and over and over, we see that these pagan nations, they built idols. And it seems like we do that in our culture today, or we see that in our culture. And people are jumping on the bandwagon of the greatest new thing, or, you know, people are always looking for something different, looking for something new. If you'll notice, Nebuchadnezzar says, and who is that God? Singular. Singular. He didn't say who's the God that's going to save. No, he said, who is that God that's going to save you? There ain't but one true and living God. That's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yahweh. As these Hebrew boys would have known him. These Hebrew boys weren't looking for a different God. They didn't need to bow down to the idol. They didn't need to. They had the true and living God. What a tremendous good it would be in the world that we live in today if we quit looking for everything else and just trusted in the true and living God. The bad thing is I'm not talking just people in general, the secular world. I'm talking about Christians. We do that. I just told you we'll turn our back on Jesus after he gets through helping us. Why can't we just be satisfied with the truth? It's sad. But we see it, 3 Hebrew boys right here who says, we're not going to do it. I want you to hear their defense on this. And they didn't get to talk to the king unless the king asked a question. I want you to know that. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now that's powerful to be saying something in front of the king. I want you to see here. It says, but if not. See, the Hebrew boys, they understood one thing. God is able. Same way we believe it here in this day and time. We believe God is able. The problem that we got, that the Hebrew boys didn't have, is if God will. And I'm going to say this, let me say it in this way. You know, even this pandemic, but, you know, cancer is a terrible thing in our nation, in our world. You know, and even in my own family, man, I got aunts. Cancer has really put a hurting on our family. And I got friends, loved ones, church members that's done the same thing. And they always are really strong. I know God is able. But what if God doesn't do what you know He's able to do? Are you going to be able to accept His will? And I think that's where a lot of Christians falter, is that we believe God's able. You know, we'll shout it in the hospitals. I know God can do this for me. I know He can. But what if He doesn't? You know, we pray, Our Father, which is in heaven, forgive us our trespasses. Lord, your will be done. You remember saying those things? Well, God's will has to be done. God's will cannot be thwarted by the fickleness of a human, because He's God. He's divine. God does what He wants to because He's God. He doesn't need us. He wants us. But God also wants us to be able to accept His will when it happens. But you see right here, these 3 Hebrew boys, they did not give in to the pressure. Everybody else bowed, not us. We're not going to bow. We're not going to give in to that pressure. King, do whatever you have to do to us, but we're not going to bow at your idols or your gods. We're not going to do that. And so I'm going to take the last half of this here Sunday school lesson, and I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about peer pressure, especially in the day and age we live in. You know, it'd be great if we could all be like these Hebrew boys all the time. It would. It'd be nice if we could stand up around our friends, around our family, around our co-workers, and we could stand on truth and not compromise and give in to peer pressure. I got some statistics here I looked up, and it amazed me. You know, it's amazing what you can find on Google these days. You know, thank God for technology. But I just want to give you some of these. Of course, we know that the most important part of a child's life during really preteen to teen years is acceptance. They want to be accepted. They want to know that, especially at home. And I'm going to come back to that, but you know, everybody's got a fear of rejection. Everybody wants to be accepted. And sometimes whenever we want to be accepted by our friends or co-workers or even family, we're willing to give in to peer pressure. We're willing to give in to the flow of, okay, well, if the majority's doing it, I guess I can do it, you know. Even if it's a sin and even if it goes against what God's told you to do. It happens. It happens. I want to give you some statistics here. These are college students. 10 college students in a study. And here's what they done. They took these college students. Now, this here was back in the 1950s is when this, it was like a little test that was done. It was a test on peer pressure for college students. You know, if you look back in the 1950s, we were a whole lot conservative than what we are today. And so, you know, they were doing these studies just to kind of do a study on peer pressure. And they had 10 college students. And the test was, they had 3 lines marked on the chalkboard. Each line was a little bit longer than the other line. And what they were going to ask, they says, whenever we point to a line on that chalkboard, whenever we get to the longest line, I want you to raise your hand. Well, they went down and they got to the second line. 9 students raised their hand and said, yeah, that's the longest line. When in actuality, the third line was the longest line. And that one person, that 10th person, kind of looked around and he seen the way the majority was going and he stuck his hand up. They done it again. The same guy. He looked around and he was, really? But because the majority went with it, he raised his hand. Well, what that one student didn't know is before the class started, the instructor had went to the other 9 and instructed them to raise their hand whenever he got to number 2 line. And he'd done all of this just to see what that one person would do. That one person was going to leave truth and what he knew to be true just to go with the crowd. That's the way it is in our culture today. We're willing to walk away from truth just to be a part of the crowd, to be accepted. And the study was to show the lack of courage that one person has to stand up and say, no, that's wrong. The whole study was about to show that one person, just to be accepted, was willing to go for something that was wrong instead of something that was true. That's the world we're living in today. I'm going to give you another one. Get this here where I can read it to you. The University of Minnesota, they've done a survey. They were asking kids, now these right here were elementary and middle grade students, okay? I want you to understand that. They were doing a little survey that they were trying to go through. And they asked these kids, they were asked what they do in times of trouble in their life. Here are your top four. Here's your top four in times of trouble. Music, drugs, friends, they'd go to their other friends for help, and video games. They were given 54 options of how they would cope during times of trouble. 54 options. And the top four were music, drugs, they would rely on what their friends had to say, or video games. I'm fixing to give you something startling right here. When it comes to peer pressure, when it comes to being accepted. Do you know where Mama was at on that list? 31st. Guess where Daddy was at on the list? 48th. That's sad. In other words, you're telling me that these kids, music, drugs, friends, and video games, they'll go outside of home to find acceptance. They'll go outside of home instead of coming to Mama and Daddy. And we're living in a culture that's teaching them that's the way to go. Do that. Don't come to Mom and Daddy. And we as Christian parents, grandparents, I'm telling you, it's not getting any easier for our kids. We need to teach our kids to not fall into peer pressure. We need to tell our kids to stand on the truth even though if the majority goes the wrong way. We need to teach our kids at home that you are accepted. You are loved. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you're involved in. You will always be accepted at home. Because if you turn your back on them, then they're going the other way. We need to let them know, yes, there are boundaries that can't be crossed. There is discipline for doing wrong. But if we don't show love and compassion and mercy in our homes and let our kids know, hey, you can tell me anything. I don't care what you've done, where you've been, who you've done it with. Come to me. You do not have to just go along with the crowd. You can stand out like these Hebrew boys. And one more that goes along with the little survey. Well, this is actually a story. And this is a story about sheep. And that's what we are, right? That's what Jesus called us. We sheep. We tend to go astray. You know, we tend to mess up and do things. You know, we got to have somebody watching us continually. We got to have somebody taking care of us continually. We got to have somebody to lead us to the still waters. We got to have somebody to lay us down in them green pastures. We're sheep. And we do tend to go astray. That's not Jessie saying that. That's Bible. That's Bible saying that about us. No matter how strong a Christian you are and how long you've been a Christian. Well, this story comes out of Turkey. And there were 1,500 sheep up on this hillside. Well, the shepherds that day, they decided, you know, we're going to leave the sheep here just for a few minutes. We're not leaving them there a half a day. We're leaving them for just a few minutes. We're going to go back to the camp and we're going to get breakfast. Well, because they went back and they didn't have no shepherd looking over them. One greedy sheep happened to look over the hill over there and says, man, that looks a lot greener over there. So that sheep starts wandering a little bit, you know, and then they had the rest of the pack of the sheep are, you know, they kind of wandering with him, you know, kind of following behind him. Well, that one sheep takes off. Come to find out, just over that horizon is a cliff, a ledge, straight down, 200 feet, rocky bottom. That one sheep jumps, falls to its death. But sheep kind of stay together. And the story read were 1,500 sheep went over that ledge that day. Miraculously, only 453, I think it said, died. The only reason the other ones didn't die because there were so many sheep down there, it kind of created a cushion. They just started bouncing off each other. But you see what one bad decision from somebody can make for the rest of the crowd? We need to stand up for our beliefs. We need to stand on truth. Don't always go with the crowd just because it looks good. You ain't always got to be the cool kid. You ain't always got to be the most popular. And yes, if you stand up and stand out like these three Hebrew boys, there's going to be a time when it's going to cost you something. There's going to be a time when your friends are going to say, well, if he don't want to go with us, if he don't want to do that with us, fine, we'll just leave him here. There's going to come a time when your friends in this world or people in this world is going to come and say, is it true? Are you really a Christian? Are you really going to stand on the truth of God? And the question that you give them that day will probably be one of the most pressure-filled questions you'll ever get asked in your life, because you know it's going to cost you something. I heard somebody say it like this. You can come into this world and you can be a thermometer. And you can just show everybody what the temperature is. Or you can stand out and be a thermostat and you have the power to control the atmosphere around you. When the heat gets turned up on you, don't just be a thermometer, be a thermostat. Have God on your side. Live for Jesus. Have that where you can just turn that thermostat and say, hey, if it's getting hot in here, I'm going to turn the air conditioner on. Be different, because you are different. We do not belong in this world. And that's one thing that the biggest thing that we learn from these three Hebrew boys, you don't have to go with the crowd. You stand on truth. These three Hebrew boys, they stood up and they stood out. When they got asked that question, is it true? They said, oh yes, King, it's true. We will not serve your gods, and we will not bow down to your image. It'll cost you something. And I ain't got time to go through the whole rest of the chapter. But because they stood for God, it says that the soldiers bound them. When it says they bound them, it tied their legs, they tied their feet, they wrapped them up, and they tossed them in that furnace. They did. But the king looked at him and he says, wait a minute. He said, I thought you bound these boys up. We did bound them up. Well, he says, they were in there walking around, and there's the Son of God in there walking around with them. If you'll stand for Jesus, I promise you, he'll never leave you, and he'll never forsake you. Sometimes it's going to hurt. Sometimes you got to go through the fire. But what had you bound when you went in the fire, as long as you got Jesus on your side, you'll come out of that fire unbound, and you'll come out on top. I love you. I hope this lesson has helped you today. Look, we don't have to blend in with the crowd. We need to be Christians. We need to act like Christians, especially in this world we're living in today. So please, take this message to heart. Take it to your kids too. It's not getting any easier for our kids. It's not. And they need to know that they got a loving mother, father, grandmother, grandparent, Sunday school teacher, preacher, deacons, elders that love them and will show them the right way. We have to do that for them. We have to stand up and stand out. I love y'all. God bless you. Got a big election coming up Tuesday. It means a lot. I'm not here to sway you to vote one way or the other. I'm just asking you to vote your convictions. If you'll stand on the truth of the Word of God and what our forefathers built this nation on, you'll make the right decision. God bless you. I love you.